Hi, it's Alistair at Electric Scotland. This is my introduction to my newsletter for 8th of June 2018. In this particular newsletter, I've done a bit of a go-over on my attitudes to Scottish independence and Brexit. I'm basically admitting straight out that I'm now against independence in Scotland. I don't think that's the right avenue for us. Maybe in many years ahead it might change, but right now I genuinely believe that we'd be far better off in the United Kingdom. And I'm also stating here that I'm very much in favour of Brexit. I think that's the right thing to do for both Scotland and Britain, and especially Scotland within the United Kingdom. Because I'm a history site, I'm really trying to read all the stuff that's going on about independence debate and the Brexit debate to try to document it, so in the years ahead there'll be a body of work on the site that goes through these times. I notice other major historians in Scotland are voting their side for Scottish independence. I frankly think they're idiots, but I think everyone's got a right to their own views. And I think everyone's got the right to try and persuade other people to their views, especially on these major issues of independence and Brexit. So I have no arguments with anyone that wants to put a case. So far, I haven't really seen a case that would convince me that independence is going to be good for Scotland. And likewise, I haven't read anything that suggests anything other than just coming out of the EU with no deal isn't in fact the best case for Brexit and for the UK. I'm looking at the fact that we're going to be paying 39 billion to come out of the EU, but it doesn't look like we're going to get much of a trade agreement or anything. The EU are certainly bullying us, and I believe Prime Minister May is frankly useless. And frankly, the sooner she goes, the better it will be for this country. She's got no backbone. She's swithering and dithering. She's obviously taking advice from the wrong people. I mean, the last general election was a total disaster. And that's because she took advice from her own inner little circle. And that inner circle was clearly totally incompetent, as are her inner circle right now. And frankly, I think the Tory cabinet is a mess. You know, we had the largest vote in the UK history for this referendum, and we voted to leave. I mean, is that not an instruction to our Parliament to get on with it? It certainly is. Yet everyone's saying, oh no, it's not, oh no, must stay in the common union, must stay in the single market. It's ridiculous. It really is totally ridiculous. I mean, I haven't read anything that would suggest being in a common market would be good for Britain, especially if we're leaving the EU, because all we'd be is rule takers. We would have no influence on any arguments or anything going on. And it's clear the EU are different from Britain. Britain's always been an international country. Our empire was brilliant. Why did the empire fail? Essentially, it was because of 2 world wars. I mean, it basically bankrupted us in effect. But nevertheless, if you actually look at the history of the empire, we did a lot that was really good. I mean, I know we did a lot that wasn't good, but on the whole, I think we did better than any other nation that said they look after the world. I mean, if you look at the Dutch and Portugal and people like that were also out there in the world looking after territories in Africa and the Americas and so forth. I mean, we did a much better job than they did. Much better job. And we left a great infrastructure behind us, and we left a great common law system in place. So we gave them the basis from which they could go forward to independence. So, you know, I mean, I just see the Commonwealth, I keep repeating, the Commonwealth is something that we should be embracing. I mean, the Commonwealth's the largest trading bloc in the world. Just going to get continually bigger. It's bigger than China. I mean, India alone, that's in the Commonwealth, is going to be the second largest country in the world population-wise and trade-wise in the years ahead anyway. And I think if you look at Dyson, he's embraced India and he's done extremely well with them because he knows how to talk to these people and deal with them. And he deals from an addition of power because he's got the ideas, he's got the capital, and people listen to him because he makes sense, for Pete's sake. So I've done a little bit of a diatribe on that in this week's newsletter. I told you why I think the way I think. I'm pointing to areas that I think that we need to look at. I mean, one of the things that Growth Commission report did, it really, I think, was a kowtow to the EU, because I think Nicola Sturgeon's been told quite frankly that with the current debt to GDP ratio, there's no chance the EU would want Scotland in the EU. So even if we were independence, we wouldn't get into the EU. And I think she's now taken this to heart, and that's why the Growth Commission is saying we must get our GDP to debt ratio down to the 3% level. And that's why she's talking about all kinds of nasty things happening. But I think it's just pragmatism. You know, she knows she wants to be in the EU because she doesn't want to rule Scotland. She wants to be ruled by the EU and Brussels and, you know, I mean, instead of the UK. Frankly, we've got a much bigger say in the UK than we will ever have under the EU. I mean, there's nothing that makes any sense for Scotland to be independent right now, folks. I genuinely believe that, and I haven't seen anyone to put a case up. As you know, I supported the Flag in the Wind and the Scots Independent newspaper for many years. But quite frankly, since Kenneth Fee left as the editorial, I think all that paper is now is a mouthpiece for the SNP. They don't question anything. I mean, they used to at least question people that were pro-independence but said stupid things. They would question it in that paper. No longer do. I mean, if you read the Scots Independent newspaper, you're just reading about the SNP and nothing else. No real good ideas coming out of that paper at all. Waste of time. I'm delighted they left, which allowed me to open myself up, because having them and hosting them on the site and having my main menu, I felt a bit constrained. But since they've left, I can now say that paper's a waste of time. If you really want independence, you get nowhere reading the Scottish Independent newspaper. So anyway, there you go. That's my kind of take on things. On to the news cycle. I mean, basically, I'm continuing to put Brexit-related articles and independence articles, but I've got a lot more of that stuff in the Scott news feed, which is on the index page of electroscotland.com. I'm only trying to pick basically stories that I think you might be interested in, or to try and encourage you to maybe have a read so that you can learn a bit more. Because frankly, I think the newspapers in Scotland are pretty poor on the whole. I mean, you almost never hear of any international news in these newspapers. And I mean, things aren't going well in the EU either, you know. I mean, we've got Italy and Spain, Austria, and the Eastern European countries. They're all really getting anti-EU. And the EU's got a hell of a lot of problems coming up in the months ahead. But that's never discussed. Everyone thinks the EU's, oh, it's great, it's great, great. It's not great. It's a dictatorship. There's no democracy there at all. The Commission decides who's going to be a commissioner, and it's commissioners that run us. And it doesn't matter what the European Parliament says, the Commission will tell us what to do. And you want an independent Scotland in the EU? We won't be independent. We'll be worse off under the EU than we ever are inside the UK. I mean, it's so obvious. I don't understand why people don't see that. Anyway, here we go. This is the news I picked for you this week. Edinburgh's tourist tax is voted through by council. Well, there's a lot of people live in Edinburgh and go to Edinburgh for holidays to see all the castles and the festival fringes and stuff like that. It's an Edinburgh City Council proposal to introduce a council tax has been labelled a dog's breakfast, as the authority agreed to push the plans through. So if you're living in Edinburgh or thinking of going there, that might be worth a read. Next story is breakthrough in study of Scotland's ancient loch dwellers. These are the Crannogs. And as you maybe know, I've got a very good article on the Crannogs, and I also visited the one at Dunkeld and took some pictures of it. Unfortunately, my camera didn't work very well when I was there, so I didn't get all the pictures I wanted. But some very good articles on the Crannogs on the site. Next one is Lewis Woods, a living memorial to Ireland's fallen heroes. It says a living memorial to the soldiers who died in the First World War will see some of Scotland's traditionally barren Hebrides islands dotted with native trees as part of a 12 million UK-wide planting project by the Woodland Trust. So that's great. That's a really good story, and I encourage you to have a read of that. Another article I picked out was the European Union versus democracy. Don't be surprised that the European Union is making such strenuous efforts to undermine British democracy. Reverse the democratic decision of our people, and if necessary, bring down our elective government in the process. And this is what I was saying about there's no democracy in the EU. I mean, you really need to read that article to understand what's going on. I've also picked another one saying growing list of hate shames Scotland. A senior judge has recommended adding people and gender and age to the list of hate crimes in Scotland. I mean, frankly, I've seen some absolutely disgusting posts in the comment section of a lot of our newspapers. I mean, there's so much hate there. Scotland must be a very unpleasant place to live in these days, if that's typical of the people there now. Objections to MaxFAC are completely missing the bigger picture. This is a story about, of course, the problems about Northern Ireland staying in or out of the EU. Basically, Northern Ireland wants to be part of the UK, out of the EU, but May's stupidity is trying to stop a lot of that happening. So again, you should really read that article to keep up to date with what's going on there. I've also picked another one, which is Scotland's GP burnout, now an epidemic. This is a doctor that's saying that basically she decided to leave the medical profession, or at least as a GP, and she tells you why. And if you actually read that article, you'll understand the great pressure GPs are under these days. And as most of us will see the doctor at some time, it's worth realising what pressures they're under. I also had another article saying Andrew Wilson's Doublethink Masterclass. This is actually from the Chock-a-Block, and I was quite interested in what he said. He said anybody who has read this post, or indeed my post on similar claims made by the SNP MSP Kate Forbes in Question Time, will know that the very much is not the reality. That is in fact a big steaming pile of horseshit. I loved his pretty blunt terms there. So again, you should read it. Raise a pint of your own to beat minimum unit pricing. A lot of discussion on this unit pricing. A lot are saying you can just pop down to England if you're near the borders and get your drinks down there at the normal low price. But here they're saying, why don't you brew your own beer? It's quite a good article on that. Next one is the penny has dropped in Holyrood as dismal economic figures released. It says chink, clink and clatter. Now the pennies have dropped as the Scottish Fiscal Commission released its latest dismal figures for our economy and the public finances last week. Then I have Brexit will power Britain's prosperity. It's already working with 800,000 new jobs. This is an article from the Sun newspaper. So again, I thought you might be interested in reading that. No need to panic. Trump's tariff tantrum is Brexit's opportunity. So let's speak behind the scenes and capitalise on the fact that Trump's more reasonable administrative in the back office is on side with the UK. This is what I was saying in my article, that, you know, if you look at it, Germany's making a profit off the US to about 500 billion. Because basically US doesn't have anything in the way of tariffs. But the EU has a lot of tariffs that makes it difficult for the US business to do business in Germany. And of course you can't just target Germany without attacking the EU. And I've been thinking to myself that it seems pretty obvious to me that he's just hanging fire until Britain exits the EU in March next year. And then, when he hammers the EU, he won't be hammering Britain, because I think he still wants to do a good deal with Britain. And this is the opportunity. But, you know, I mean, there's so many people that totally hate Trump and anything about him, they won't listen to anything. But I think they should start to think that. So, again, read that article. And then, because there's problems in the EU, I brought you a couple of EU stories. One is Spain's road to nowhere. And the other is how Draghi lost Italy. So it shows the disruption in both of these countries at the moment. Then a much needed refresher on free trade and how it cuts prices for consumers. Again, that should be a must read by everyone. Learn about what free trade is and how we can benefit from it. It says that the latest iteration of the Brexit argument has us focusing on three things: sovereignty, immigration and trade. So do have a read of that, I encourage you. Then Javid gives Gov a run for first place in our cabinet league table. May is back in negative territory. This is a poll done by the Conservative Home. I was quite interested because initially, I mean, we haven't heard much from Javid as yet, but he's the new Home Secretary. He's of Pakistani origin. And I don't know, he seems to be talking a lot of common sense. And I think he's going to come out with a good immigration plan for Britain. But we'll see. But very encouraging words are all over the place about him right now. So I can see how he might be considered. I don't know why he'll want to support Gov, though. Because Gov, I thought, was a wee traitor when it came to the referendum stuff. You know, he ditched Johnson, who he backed. I mean, he just looked like I'm out for me. And if me happens to give you something good, then great. But it's me. And I don't like that guy. I haven't taken to him particularly. I keep my eye on him, but I don't really like the guy. I don't think he's got any principles or honesty about him. He'll do whatever it takes to get on for him, not for the country. So I don't agree with Gov there. But anyway, we'll see. I'd rather have Mogg. I will say it right now. Next story is Scots NHS staffing crisis as thousands of nurses quit. It said more than 4,300 nurses quit the service last year, it's emerged. I mean, that's pretty terrible, you know, when you think about it, because even if we recruit new nurses, we're losing experienced nurses for new nurses. That can't be good for Scotland. Next story is Brexit has made us more relaxed about immigration, not less. And I thought you might pique your interest with that one. It says the greatest danger lies in trying to ape an opinion the speaker neither holds or understands. Immigration is a particular minefield. Then I have another story, which is the Scottish Government report. It admits Brexit could generate 540 million and 5,000 jobs for the fishing industry. Great news, that. So you should read that. And then I've got one which is called The Kids Are All Right. Economist John Quiggin wants to change the way we talk about millennials. So I thought, yeah, if you've got youngsters around the place, or you're a youngster yourself, good to have a read of that. Then Irish Presbyterians vote to loosen Scottish church ties. Presbyterian Church has voted to loosen its ties with the Church of Scotland due to its more liberal attitude to same-sex marriage. Then the next story I've got is what MPs need to know about trade policy. And again, it's because trade is one of the major reasons that we're leaving the EU. I think you really need to understand that, and that's why I put that story out. Then finally it says, Growth Commission, really? Here's how to create new Scottish growth. I picked this selection because I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but I think that's the kind of discussion that we need to be having about what can we do in Scotland to grow the country under devolution in particular right now, because they pretty well admit that most of what we need to do can be done with powers we already have. And we're going to get a lot more of them when we leave the EU. So that's the final stories I picked for you. All of these ones are intended to educate you and teach you things of what's going on in the world, and hopefully give you different considerations to things. Okay, so on to Electric Canadian. I'm continuing with the transactions of the Canadian Society of Civil Engineers. I've got the 1941 issue up, which talks about obviously the Royal Air Force and the war and stuff like that, because obviously we're in that period. I found a book, Travels and Adventures in Canada and the Indian Territories between the years 1760 and 1778. It's by an Alexander Henry, who was a fur trader. This is a new edition of his book. It's edited with notes, illustrative and biographical, by James Bain. So I really enjoyed having a read of that. It's always nice to read these kind of books when you've been struggling with Brexit and independence and everything. And then found a wee book called Canadian History Notes. It's got lots of wee stories in there, and some of them I think were great. So again, it's one you can dip into and read a wee story, maybe in your lunch break or something like that. And then, like I'm doing with Australia and Electric Scotland, I'm decided to do another very important historical publication, which is Canada and its provinces. It's actually 23 volumes in all. And again, I'm going to put one up each week, so you'll get the first volume you can read this week. And then a couple of stories from Conrad Black. It's long overdue. Overhaul of US criminal justice system may have begun. And this other story is why Doug Ford must be the next Premier of Ontario. Because today are actually elections in Ontario for our whatever parliament we want. Basically the Liberal Party has been in power for the last 15 years. It's been disastrous. They're basically thinking that they're only going to get maybe 19% of the vote. And it's really between the NDP, the New Democratic Party, and the Conservative Party. The last polling showed the Conservatives about 1.5 points ahead of the NDP. But so we'll see how it goes. We won't know until later on tonight about who won. And that's it for Electric Canadian. On the Electric Scotland side, I've continued with the Commonwealth of Australia. We've got volume 11 up, which is January 1823 to November 1825, under Sir Thomas Brisbane. So that should be of interest to those that are interested in Australia at least. Then I've got the Transaction Journal of Proceedings of the Dumfriesshire and Galloway Natural History and Antiquarian Society. I've got a session up for 1892 to 93. I mean, you're not going to read all of the articles in there, but if you just look at the contents page, I'm sure you'll find articles that you think, oh, that looks interesting, have a read of that. That's what I basically do with those kind of books. And there's always something of interest there. I've got a new Robert Burns Lives article up. It's the Agnes Burns Songbook by Christine McHugh. That's a really good article. I enjoyed reading that, so I hope you enjoy it as well. Then I've got some pictures of old texts. This is Marty McIntyre sent in 3 graphics to me, which are pictures of old texts. One of them is in Gaelic, so if you don't read Gaelic, you won't be able to read that, but it's nice to see it. The other 2 are the front page of a book, and the second is a page from it, which actually mentions the Red Book of the McIntyres, which has been lost, by the way, but it's saying where they knew it was last, but after that they don't know where it went to. Then as it's and the McIntyres, because I was trying to search for something for the McIntyres, and I came across a sermon about the Honourable Archibald McIntyre. It's basically the sermon at his funeral, and I thought it was rather interesting, and so I thought I would I put that up for at least McIntyres to read, but others might well be interested in reading it. And then I saw a video. Nebraska retiree uses Earth's heat to grow oranges in snow. And I thought, wow, well, this could be something that Scotland could learn from, Canada could learn from, in fact, other countries of the world could learn from. I mean, it's saying winter temperatures in Alliance, Nebraska, can drop to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. It said the record load is minus 40. But retired mailman Russ Finch grows oranges in his backyard greenhouse without paying for heat. And I will add that I noticed in England, I don't know if it's happening in Scotland, but I know the English strawberry growers can actually give you fresh strawberries even into December because they do them in polytunnels. I haven't seen any mention of polytunnels in Canada at all, and our strawberry season used to be about 3 weeks max, and that's about it. So I think there's a lot that could learn from each other by reading these kind of articles, you know. Then I got on the Celtic Church in Scotland. I've been asked about this written by the Celtic Church as opposed to the Free Kirk or Catholic Church and stuff. So I found this book and I thought I'd put it up. It was written by John Dowden, who is the bishop. He was the Bishop of Edinburgh in 1884. So I thought that might be of interest to you. I've also got another account of the game of curling with songs from the Cannon Mills Curling Club. So I know curling is popular in Scotland and in Canada. I thought I'd include that because you might see some of the songs and decide to start singing them when you go to the matches and so forth. So I've added the preface for the book and a link to it, which is at the bottom of our existing curling page. So if you get the curling page, you go towards the bottom, you'll see the link for it and the preface of the book. Then I've got some information on local industries of Glasgow and the west of Scotland. This was actually in 1901. And again, I thought you might take it for historical, because I've often said that the period, basically 1800 to 1950 or so, was about the main period of Scottish growth. But 1790, I think, we kind of kicked in big time in Scotland. So 1792, and this is written 1901, so I think you'll see how our local industries did really well and how we embraced the world at that time, which we no longer seem to do for some reason. Then another one, I've got Sermons and Letters of the late Reverend Alec Pringle, with a memoir of the author by his surviving colleague, the Reverend David Young. Again, when you look for Celtic Church and stuff like that, sometimes you stumble across these kind of books. And again, the biography is interesting, whether you want to read the sermons or not, but he seems to be quite a character. And then a book that I have a lot of time for, and I have yet to read the whole thing, but I am going to, is Scotland as It Was and As It Is. It's by the Duke of Argyll, and it's the second edition, so it's obviously popular enough to go to second edition, and it was printed in 1887. He starts off by saying, history has now taken its place among the sciences, which must be studied on the principle and according to the methods of the division of labour. Its larger outlines have indeed been traced already, and some of them at least by master hands. But our growing knowledge has raised a growing sense of the volume that we have yet to learn. The problems of human life are felt to be infinitely complex, and the facts which throw real light upon them are seen to be of corresponding character. No one mind can recognize on record or clearly more than a fraction of them. Mere outlines, even when not positively misleading, are all the least wholly insufficient. It is the work of our time to fill up such outlines by the careful study of particular epochs, of some particular ideas of facts, or of some special chain of causes. The field is a wide one, and the harvest is immense. I mean, that's really why I bring you such a wide spread of Scottish history, because we can't all spend our time just reading history. You know, if we want to read history, we probably want to focus on specific areas, and then get really knowledgeable about these specific areas, which might then lead you to other areas. I mean, when I first started my website, I just wanted to explore the history of Scotland. And I didn't really understand quite what that meant when I said that at the time. But the first major publication I put up was the history of the Highlands, Highland clans and Highland regiments. It was a 6-volume set that I got, and I put the whole thing up on the website. But I just learned so much from that. And out of that came so much more. I mean, after that, because obviously the history of the Highlands didn't encompass histories of, like Bannockburn, for example, was not a Highland battle as such. And so it was glossed over in that history. So I obviously got subsequent histories which did cover that. But then I got really interested international, because I wanted to know more about the people, and that's why I got the Domestic Annals of Scotland up and all its volumes. And it's by reading those domestic annals that I started to see references to other things which I thought tweaked my interest, and I followed up on it. For example, the first article I almost read was the fact that the Scottish women were concerned that some 20,000 young men from Scotland had gone to fight for Germany. Well, I didn't know anything about that. And I thought, well, we fought 2 wars against Germany, and here we are fighting a war for Germany. I wanted to learn more, and I thought, 20,000. I mean, in those days, our population wasn't that great back in those days, so 20,000 young men was a major export from our country, and I wanted to learn more. And that's why going to the antiquarian bookshops, because we didn't have internet archives or Google Books or anything at that time when I was doing this, I found, luckily, in my favourite antiquarian shop, a book about the Scots in Germany. And of course, all became clear when I read that book. And that's when I went on to do more. From the same author came Scots in Poland, Scots in Prussia, and Scots in Sweden. So I eventually got all those books and put them all up on the website for you to read. So anyway, that's that. The story I picked for you this week is about trade tokens. It's by Philip Sully, who is a FR History S. Mrs. Sully is the first place. Mrs. Sully, in the first place, made some general remarks regarding trade tokens, pointing out that while the whole coinage on record from Anglo-Saxon times to the present did not exceed 1,000 different specimens. The trade tokens issued at various times exceeded 60,000. The cause of the issue of such tokens was the lack of small change. He directed attention to a penny of the time of Edward I in England and John Balliol in Scotland, which was purely the working man's coin of the day, and represented his day's wages during many a score of years. It was the only coin they had, and to get what was proportionally a halfpenny and a farthing, they broke the penny piece into halves and quarters. For 3 centuries, this state of affairs existed until Henry VII made a great reform in the coinage. But I think when you look at how it started, amazing, it's really got a good story about it. And I often wonder if we could use trade tokens today, maybe? I don't know, but I just thought it was a great story. So that's one I've given you to have a read out this time around. And that's basically it for this week. So, obviously encourage you to comment on any of the stories that are in there and share it with us, our community here. And again, this will go up in the YouTube, and I'll put a link to the actual newsletter where you get all the links to all these stories to read. And I hope you do read them, because it'll expand your knowledge of the world and things. Okay, thanks for listening, and look forward to hearing from you. Bye.